How's everyone doing today? I'm the Suited Whiskey Snob here for another whiskey review, and today I have a new category in the whiskey industry. I have a Japanese blended whiskey. So we get to go through some of the history behind Japanese whiskey, some of the history behind Suntory Toki. So this video is really going to bring out some of the suited snob in me. So I will give viewer discretion advised. If you are a Japanese whiskey lover, you might want to move past this video because that's something that I'm not. So I'll go through why I'm not exactly a huge fan of Japanese whiskey. One of the main reasons is there isn't a lot of regulation to Japanese whiskey. Like there is with Scotland, like there is with the United States, there's a lot of regulations to what you can call what in the whiskey industry. Like in Scotland, to be called Scotch, everything you do needs to come out of Scotland. To be bourbon, to be a Kentucky straight bourbon, needs to be done in Kentucky, everything needs to be done in Kentucky. With Japanese whiskey, there's almost no regulations. It doesn't have to be aged for a certain amount of years. It doesn't have to have all the resources taken from Japan. Really, there's nothing that classifies Japanese whiskey besides bottling it in Japan. And that doesn't sit well with me. The fact that they can take from anywhere in the world, they can take resources from Scotland, which is a very common thing they do. They take resources from Scotland. Sometimes they even take whiskey that's already been completely done the process in Scotland. They'll take it, they'll age it in a barrel for a year, put it in a bottle, and then they'll call it Japanese whiskey. And for me, that's not very traditional, that's not very historical. There's just nothing special about that to me. You're basically paying for a scotch or whatever you want to call it, but it's not Japanese whiskey. That's as far as I can say. It's really not. But without that, without further ado, we're gonna get ahead and get into this whiskey. So Suntory Toki is so Toki means time in Japanese, so that's kind of a cool little connection with the whiskey. And another thing is that this is made out of, I believe, 3 different whiskeys. It's going to be a multi-grain whiskey, so it's got multiple different grains mixed in here. But I believe they've taken out of 3 distilleries out of Japan. I believe 2 of the distilleries they've taken from are malt whiskeys, not malt whiskeys. 2 of the distilleries are grain whiskeys, meaning they use multiple different grains while doing the process. And then one of the 3 distilleries is a strictly malt whiskey, so it's going to have one specific grain in it. That's all I really know about the Japanese whiskey industry and Suntory Toki. I definitely don't hate the whiskey. I mean, with everything I've said about disliking Japanese whiskey, by no means does that mean that it's a bad whiskey. It is not. It's a fairly good whiskey. It's just I don't like the tradition behind it and all of that. That's my dislike on Japanese whiskey. But it's nice. The bottle's nice. You have that nice Japanese writing on the front, so it gives you the idea that it's from Japan, even though it's probably not so much from Japan. And there's not a whole lot of information on the bottle either. It's 43%. It's going to be 86 proof. That's all the information they give you on the bottle. That's another thing I don't like about Japanese whiskey. Very, very blunt with all the information they give on here. Very restricted. They don't want to say anything about it because they're ashamed. That's the suited snob in me, so I am sorry, guys. I mean, you see my name on my title, so don't be surprised when you get some snobbiness. But without further ado, guys, I'm gonna pour me a glass of Suntory Toki whiskey. And like I said, it's not a bad whiskey. It's not bad at all. The color is very reminiscent of the kind of Islay region. It looks kind of like a Koala or an Ardbeg color. Very pale gold, almost water-like. Very, very light-bodied whiskey. But let's go ahead and jump into the nose and see what I find here. It's very fruity. I get some green apple in there. I want to say some grapes as well. A little bit of vanilla, I want to say as well. A little bit of almond. Very briny. Quite a bit of harsh alcohol, ethanol in the nose as well. It's clearly a very young whiskey. I mean, you can tell that A by the color and B by the nose. It's got some spice on it, but no real spice and no real in-depth flavors. Nothing drastic coming out of it, and quite a bit of the ethanol still involved. Hasn't had that time to go through the chemical processing in the barrel, which makes the ethanol less apparent on the palate and the nose. But let's jump into the palate and see what we can find there. That's nice on the palate, actually. It goes down very smooth. That's one thing I'll definitely give Japanese whiskey. I have 2 Japanese whiskey over there in my collection. I've tried multiple different Japanese whiskey. They all seem to be relatively smooth, although they have a lingering ethanol and spice for sure. But honestly, I don't mind that. The spice is kind of nice. I'm a poet and I didn't know it. No, but the spice is nice, and the initial blast is definitely a fruity, creamy blast, kind of like a fruit cake, which is very nice actually. It's a pleasant whiskey. It's not an overly expensive whiskey either, so it's not going to break the bank for you to try a Japanese whiskey. This is, I believe, this exact whiskey, I believe, is fairly new in the industry. So, very popular as well. That's the other thing, is everybody knows about this guy right here. It's one of the reasons I got it. Of course, you needed a Japanese, if you have an extensive whiskey collection, you need to have all the different categories, including Japanese whiskey, which is why I do have it. But no, it's friendly. It's not bad. It's very fruity, very it's sort of basic, There's not a whole lot going on. It's creamy and fruity, and that's the extent of it. But it does those 2 things very well. That's one of the things. And then the spice lingers. Definitely lingers. See, now I'm getting some barrel spice on the nose as well. So that's something that I've just uncovered. And we're gonna jump to the palate, see if anything else jumps out at me. Kind of like a pepper. That's the spice I'm getting. It's more of a pepper spice than a barrel spice. Yeah, after tasting the palate, it doesn't change my mind. This is a very young whiskey. I would honestly be willing to bet that this is a 2 to 3 year aged whiskey in here. Yeah, I'd be willing to put a lot of money on it. It's a 2 to 3 year aged whiskey in there. It's very nice, very friendly, absolutely amazing introductory to whiskey. It's friendly enough that you're not going to be scared away when you take a sip. It's smooth, so you're not going to have the effects of the burn. I mean, you will, especially if you haven't drank whiskey straight. You're definitely going to have some burn from this. It's got the spiciness of it, but it's definitely lacking some metallic, briny kind of notes to it. So that's one thing that you can uncover for a new beginner whiskey drinker. But yeah, every time I hate on Japanese whiskey, after I have a glass, I definitely have a newer outlook on it, because it's a good whiskey. And as much as I'm very traditional and old-fashioned in the way that, I like the fact that there's rules to what can become what. And believe it or not, one of my favorite things is when the distillery was established. So I love when a company can be established in the 1700s and still be running to this day, which is why I absolutely love the older distillery whiskeys. And that's one of the reasons I absolutely hate Japanese whiskey. It's a damn fine whiskey, but honestly, my end-all opinion of Japanese whiskey, because of the tradition and because of the regulations, I think Japanese whiskey should, one of two scenarios: A, leave the whiskey industry, or B, make some goddamn regulations. Make Japanese whiskey true to Japan. Make it relative to Japan. There's nothing that really ties this in with Japan. I'm just buying a freaking whiskey that was bottled in Japan. I don't care about that. Call me a pseudo snob. I don't really care. But without that, guys, I think that's the end of my video here today. Japanese whiskey, you know how I feel. It's a good whiskey. As much as I feel the way I do, my unbiased opinion is gonna be, this is a good whiskey. Especially for the price point, this is a good whiskey. It's very friendly, it's very smooth. It's something that I do suggest for fairly new whiskey drinkers and for somebody looking to sample something in the Japanese whiskey category. You will feel like you're drinking scotch, because you basically are, but it's not bad. That's my recommendation, guys, on the Suntory Toki whiskey. That's everything from me, so if you enjoyed my video, please hit that thumbs up down low. Any comments, reviews, any suggestions you want me to do anything in the future, please throw it down in the comments below. Hit that subscribe button, and I will see you guys for my next whiskey review. Cilantro, and have a good night.